Everyone who doesn't celebrate Hanukkah misses out on this important fact about end times. To which you're probably thinking, come on, isn't Hanukkah nothing more than a Jewish version of Christmas? How can an 8-candle menorah, spinning dreidel top, and some gold foil coins teach us anything about the end times or even be godly? Well, they can be godly, and they do teach us about the end times. Did you know that the villain of the story, Antiochus IV Epiphanes, is the greatest foreshadow in history of what the future Antichrist is going to be like? He even desecrated the temple in a prelude to the coming abomination of desolation. Then, after Antiochus was defeated, the Hebrews rededicated the temple. That's where the term Hanukkah comes from. It means dedication. So the Hanukkah story is the most clear-cut end-time foreshadow in the Bible. There are even references in it to the parable of the 10 virgins. Bet you didn't know that. But I can still hear you thinking, Hanukkah isn't found in the Bible, is it? But yes, it is. In fact, Jesus is the only person in the Scriptures, Old Testament, New Testament, seen celebrating Hanukkah. Did Jesus actually celebrate Hanukkah? He did. In John 10:22 through 23, at that time, the Feast of Dedication, see, that's Hanukkah, took place in Jerusalem. It was winter, and Jesus was walking in the temple area in the portico of Solomon. So Jesus not only celebrated Hanukkah, he made a special trip to Jerusalem to do so. And what he did and discussed at that time had incredible significance for the end times. For instance, he discussed the coming Antichrist, who's a big feature in Hanukkah, by the way. In John 10:10, Jesus said, "The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came so that they would have life and have it abundantly." Jesus compared himself to the good shepherd with the coming wicked shepherd being the Antichrist. And we'll talk about these things later in this video and other videos, so watch the whole thing. And don't discount Hanukkah, please, or its symbols or traditions, just because Jews are the ones celebrating it right now for the most part. While most Christians are celebrating Christmas and Jesus' first coming, the small number of Christians celebrating Hanukkah are learning about Jesus' second coming. Let's start with the dreidel, the four-sided spinning top. You know, the kids play a game where they win gelt or gold foil-covered chocolate coins. But that dreidel, or spinning top, actually can help us understand part of the historic and prophetic nature of the holiday. How so? Well, the letters on the sides of a dreidel stand for a great miracle happened there. What is that miracle? If you ask most Jews today, they'll tell you that it's 1 day of oil for the menorah lasted 8 days. But that's not the miracle. Frankly, it probably isn't true, as it isn't even found in the Bible or in Maccabees, which is the part of the Apocrypha where the Hanukkah story is found. Rather, it's probably just a legend made up by the rabbis. The real miracle is that God preserved his holy people from the thief who came to steal, kill, and destroy, Antiochus IV Epiphanes that we've talked about. There are many thieves, many preliminary antichrists like him coming, as John tells us in 1 John. Antiochus Epiphanes was certainly one. And Hanukkah is a promise that God will preserve his people not only from them, but the final thief when he comes, the final Antichrist. And that is the first way that Christians who celebrate Hanukkah have insight into the prophetic nature of what is to come. But there are more. Let's dig into what happened back then that inspired this beloved holiday. As we said, the story of Hanukkah is told in the books of 1st and 2nd Maccabees, which are not in the canon of Scripture, but rather are historical books. And that doesn't mean we shouldn't read them. We just shouldn't consider them like canon. Now, after Alexander the Great died, his empire was split into various sub-empires. Israel came under the control of the first of these, the Ptolemies, who ruled Egypt, then later the Seleucids, who ruled Syria. Both groups initially respected Jewish culture and protected Jewish institutions and their religion. This policy, though, was dramatically reversed by this guy we've been talking about, Antiochus IV Epiphanes, who invaded Jerusalem and Judea at the request of someone known as the sons of Tobias. Now pay attention to this part, because it has a lot of relevance to things that are happening like right now that you're reading about in the newspaper. Now this group, the sons of Tobias, led the Hellenizing Jewish faction in Jerusalem, who attempted to replace Hebrew culture and religion with Greek culture and religion. They were expelled to Syria around 170 BC by the high priest Onias. The exiled sons of Tobias then lobbied this guy, Antiochus IV Epiphanes, who was a Greek, by the way, and so was sympathetic to their cause. And this is what Josephus relates happened. The king, being thereto disposed beforehand, complied with them, came upon the Jews with a great army, took their city by force, and slew a great multitude of those that favored the Ptolemies, and sent out his soldiers to plunder them without mercy. He also spoiled the temple and put a stop to the constant practice of offering a daily sacrifice for 3 years and 6 months. And that's from the Jewish War. Notice all the foreshadows of the Antichrist in this. He invades Jerusalem. He desecrates the temple. He stops the daily sacrifice, and he does it for 3.5 years, the same time as the Great Tribulation. This matches so much of our prophetic scripture, but in this case, we learn something new. The greatest foreshadow of the Antichrist was asked to invade Israel by a group from Israel who didn't practice Judaism and were expelled. Is this something we could see happening today in the next couple of years? We absolutely could. Substitute the Palestinians in the story for the sons of Tobias, and you can imagine this same thing happening. You can imagine the Antichrist invading at their request, or at least to help their cause. This sounds very modern and very possibly biblical. Look at what Antiochus did. He desecrated the temple. He stopped the daily sacrifice. Exactly what the Antichrist will do. So if you think Hanukkah has nothing to do with the Bible or nothing to do with Christianity, please think again. The lessons it teaches are very relevant. And of course, that's why you follow this channel. For just that sort of insight. This is Bible teacher Nelson Walters, and if you're liking this video so far, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. So as we examine the account in 2 Maccabees that details the Hanukkah story, Antiochus was intervening in an internal civil war between two religious factions in Jerusalem, Judaism and the Greek religion. Antiochus took the side of the Greeks by prohibiting the religious practices of the Jews. This, of course, is almost identical to what is happening now in Israel between the Jews and the Muslim factions, and what may eventually happen if the Antichrist comes to the aid of the Palestinians. So my thinking is, he likely will, that this is going to repeat. Now, after the Second Temple in Jerusalem was looted and sacrifices stopped, Judaism was outlawed. Then, in 167 BC, Antiochus ordered the altar of Zeus be erected in the temple itself. He banned circumcision, and he ordered pigs to be sacrificed on the altar of the temple. This all was a foreshadow of the abomination of desolation that Jesus prophesied would happen again in Matthew 24, 15 through 16. This is another important aspect of the Hanukkah story. These actions then provoked a large-scale revolt. Menorahs, a Jewish priest, and his 5 sons led a rebellion against Antiochus. It took a couple years, but in 167 BC, the Jewish revolt against this guy was successful. This is a foreshadow of the two witnesses and their opposition to the Antichrist. But will this opposition be more than just the two witnesses? Are they going to lead an entire contingent of underground rebels against the Antichrist based on the Hanukkah story? We think that will be the case. But what about the most famous part of the Hanukkah celebration, the lighting of the Hanukkah, the 8-candle menorah? The menorah in the holy place of the temple, after all, only had 7 candles, while this holiday version has 8 candles plus a 9th candle in the center that lights the others. The menorah in the temple was lit to bring God's light to the holy place. Now, this 8-candle version is lit to commemorate what happened at that time. In the Hanukkah account, the temple was liberated and then rededicated. The menorah in the temple was relit. The festival of Hanukkah and the Hanukkah came later and were instituted to celebrate this event. According to the Talmud, which is the writing of the rabbis, not part of Scripture, please understand that. This is how the rededication happened and why it's 8 days. For when the Greeks entered the sanctuary, they defiled all the oils therein. And when the Hasmonean dynasty prevailed against and defeated them, they made search and found only 1 cruse of oil, which lay with the seal of the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, which contained sufficient oil for 1 day's lighting only. Yet a miracle was wrought therein, and they lit the lamp therein for 8 days. Shabbat 21b. That's where the theory of the miracle of the oil comes from. But this miracle of the oil is widely regarded as only a legend come up by these rabbis, and its authenticity has been questioned, since the Middle Ages. Remember, the Talmud is not Scripture. It's the oral tradition of the rabbis who opposed Jesus. I always put it in that context when I read it. Now, in 2 Maccabees chapter 1, we learned the feast was 8 days because it was a delayed observance of the 8-day Feast of Booths, or Sukkot, or Feast of Tabernacles, because during the battle between the Greeks and the Jews, there wasn't time for a properly festive Feast of Tabernacles that year, and they sort of celebrated it along with the rededication of the temple. But either way, whether the miracle of the oil is true or not, the Hanukkah represents the light of our testimony. Jews today say the reason for the Hanukkah lights is not for the lighting of the house within, in other words, the house that you live in, but rather for the illumination of the house without, so that passerbyers should see it and be reminded of the holiday's miracle. Accordingly, lamps are set up in a prominent window or near the door leading to the street as a testimony. In some neighborhoods, they're even set up outside for the same reason. In Christian homes like mine, it's a testimony or a witness not only to what God did back then, but what he is going to do in the future in defeating the Antichrist. So because it's 8 days, there are 8 candles on this menorah, plus the raised 9th lamp that's in the middle and set apart, called the shamash, or servant light. Now, yeah, it probably sounds familiar to you. You probably know who the servant is. We'll get to that. And that's used to kindle the other lights. It, of course, represents the Messiah Jesus, the servant of Isaiah 53, who lights all of our individual testimonies. Okay, but why 8 days? 1 for each of the 7 years of the tribulation, and then an 8th lamp, which represents the millennial kingdom that follows the tribulation. We are to be lights in a dark world during that time. I'm sure this reminds you of Jesus' parable of the 10 virgins. We told you that we would get to that, where the alarm went out that the bridegroom was coming, and all the virgins lit their lamps of testimony. But only half had oil to keep them lit. The other half had no oil, and their lamps went out. This sounds shockingly similar to the miracle of the oil from Hanukkah. Even if it's just a legend, it still is going to take a miracle for Christians to keep their lamps of testimony lit during the tribulation. And that miracle happens because Jesus is the central candle, kindling the other lamps. This brings up a great story of a modern Hanukkah miracle that I really want to tell you, that was told to me by Rabbi Jason Sobel. So a shout out to him. There was a cantor. Now, a cantor is someone who leads worship in a traditional Jewish synagogue. And he and his family were escaping from Nazi Germany on a train back during the Holocaust times, hoping to escape before the Nazis caught them. They had forged documents that they hoped would get them out of Germany. They were right on the border of France, crossing from Germany into freedom, when all of a sudden the train stopped and the Germans began checking papers. Naturally, they became very nervous because their papers were forged. If they were caught, they would be sent to the concentration camps and killed. Then, as the Germans came onto their car, all of a sudden, all the lights went out on the train. There was a power failure. The father then reached into his coat pocket and he pulled out his Hanukkah, as it was the last night of Hanukkah, and he would be faithful to his traditions no matter what it cost them. Well, naturally, their kids just freaked out as he lit the candles. The only light anywhere, and it was a Jewish Hanukkah. Surely the Germans would realize they were Jews now. But the cantor ignored his kids, put the lights, the candles right in the window for everyone to see as his testimony. And sure enough, the Nazis came right up to them. But instead of arresting them, they said, "Listen, we need your help. You are so wise to bring these travel candles with you in case of an emergency. Can we use your candelabra to check people's papers?" The father gave it to them, and they didn't even bother to check the cantor's papers. In minutes, they were safely across the border to freedom. The dad turned to his family and said, "Listen, you witnessed a modern Hanukkah miracle here tonight. Don't ever forget what God does and can do. He's still in the business of doing miracles and delivering his people." I just love that story. Our fates are always in God's hands. It will be just like that in the tribulation when we light our lamps of testimonies as wise virgins. Click right here for an in-depth analysis of that parable of the 10 virgins and what exactly it is that wakes up all the virgins. Till then, this is Nelson, and I'll see you there.